8 years. That's how long it took for Callum Voss to walk back into her life, not with a phone call, not with a letter, but through the glass doors of the pediatric wing at St. Augustine Medical Center, bleeding through his shirt and gripping the arm of a man who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. Wren didn't freeze. She'd trained herself out of freezing years ago, back when she was 26 and pregnant and standing in an empty apartment with a sticky note on the kitchen counter that said, "I'm sorry. Don't look for me." She froze anyway. The triage nurse at the front desk was already talking. Something about a laceration, possible internal bleeding. The man kept refusing to give a name. But Wren's brain had gone quiet in the way it only did during the worst moments. The kind of quiet that meant her body recognized the danger before her mind caught up. Callum Voss, older. A scar along his jaw that hadn't been there before. But the same dark eyes, the same way he held his shoulders like the world owed him something, and he was deciding whether to collect. He hadn't seen her yet. She turned to the nurse. "I'll take it from here." 7 years, 8 months, and some odd days ago, Wren had been a second-year resident at a different hospital entirely, working double shifts and surviving on bad coffee and the specific kind of stubborn that her mother called a character flaw and she called a survival strategy. She'd met Callum at a charity gala she hadn't wanted to attend. Her attending had handed her 2 tickets and told her she needed to exist outside this building occasionally. And she'd gone because she was tired, and sometimes tired people make decisions they wouldn't make otherwise. He'd been leaning against a pillar near the bar, not drinking, just watching the room with the kind of attention that made her think he was either security or trouble. She'd found out later he was both. They'd talked for 3 hours. She hadn't talked to anyone like that in years. Really talked, not the surface conversation that passed for socializing when you worked 90-hour weeks. He was smart and he was careful, and he laughed at the right moments, and she'd gone home that night thinking about him in a way that felt dangerous even then. She should have paid attention to that feeling. They dated for 4 months. He was private in a way she'd chalked up to introversion, unavailable in a way she'd chalked up to a demanding career in investment consulting, which she now understood to be the vaguest possible description for what he actually did. She'd loved him in the quick, reckless way you love someone when you're 26 and haven't been broken yet. When she'd found out she was pregnant, she'd sat on the bathroom floor for 20 minutes, and then she'd called him. He'd answered on the second ring. She told him. He was quiet for a long time. "I can't do this," he said finally. "Not I'm scared or give me time to think. Just, I can't do this." 3 weeks later, the sticky note, the empty apartment, and Wren, alone, learning what it felt like to be left. She hadn't looked for him. That was the thing people assumed, that she must have tried, that she must have wanted answers, that any reasonable person in her position would have chased down the man who disappeared on her. But Wren had looked at that sticky note and felt something harden in her chest, quiet and permanent as bone, and she'd decided she didn't need his reasons. She had Sorcy, who was 7 now and obsessed with marine biology and had her mother's stubbornness and some stranger's dark eyes that Wren had made peace with years ago. Sorcy, who asked about her father exactly once when she was 5, and Wren had said he couldn't stay, and her daughter had looked at her very seriously and said, "Okay, but did he know about me?" And Wren had said yes, and her daughter had nodded and gone back to her book on octopuses. That was the moment Wren had understood that her daughter was going to be fine, more than fine. Sorcy was built from something solid. It was Wren who still had the sticky note folded in the back of her nightstand drawer. Not because she missed him. She'd stopped missing him somewhere around Sorcy's 2nd birthday, when she'd looked around the table at her mother and her best friend Petra and her colleagues who'd become something closer than colleagues, and realized the shape of her life was full. She kept it because it reminded her what the absence of an explanation looked like, so she'd never mistake silence for something it wasn't. "Name," she said, pulling on gloves, not looking at Callum directly, looking at the chart, looking at the wound. The man who'd brought him in, broad, watchful, the kind of still that meant training, stepped back to let her work. "Vincent," Callum said, "that's not your name." A pause. She could feel him looking at her. She kept her eyes on the laceration. Clean, but deep, probably a knife. She'd seen enough to know. Wren, he said, very quiet. You've lost a significant amount of blood, and you possibly have a broken rib based on your breathing pattern. She pressed 2 fingers against the edge of the wound and watched him flinch. I'm going to need a real name for the chart. Does it matter? Medically, yes. For insurance and liability, yes. Personally, she pulled back and looked at him directly for the first time, let him see that the quiet in her face was not warmth, was not welcome, was something entirely different. I stopped caring about your name a long time ago. Something moved across his face. Not quite guilt. Not quite pain. Something she didn't have a name for and didn't want to spend time finding one. Callum Voss, he said. She wrote it down. She got through the next 40 minutes on the same autopilot that had gotten her through medical school and residency, and the night Sayurse had a 104 fever and the pediatric on-call was unreachable. She cleaned the wound. She ordered imaging. She spoke to him in the clipped professional register she used with difficult patients, which was accurate because he was a patient and he was difficult, and she was not going to let this become anything else. The man who'd brought him in, she learned his name was Garrett, offered without being asked, like he was used to managing introductions for someone who didn't manage his own, waited in the hallway. He had the quality of a person who had been waiting in hallways for a long time and didn't mind it. When the imaging came back, she stood outside the room for a moment with the results in her hand. 2 fractured ribs, no internal bleeding, which was luck more than anything. He'd need monitoring, pain management, probably 48 hours minimum. She'd have to tell him that. She'd have to go back in there. She thought about calling Dr. Maddox, having him take over the chart, citing a personal conflict. She could do that. It was allowed. She thought about Sayurse at school right now, probably correcting her teacher about something related to deep-sea ecosystems. She went back in. 2 fractured ribs, she said. No internal bleeding. You're lucky. I've been told that before. I doubt whoever told you that was looking at your imaging. She hung the results on the board and turned to face him. He was watching her the way he used to, that careful, measuring attention that she'd once found flattering and now understood was just how he moved through the world, cataloging everything for potential threat or uses. You'll need to stay for observation. 48 hours, minimum. I can't stay 48 hours. Then you can leave AMA and sign a form acknowledging that you understand the risks. She kept her voice even. I'll have the nurse bring it. Wren, Dr. Calloway. He stopped. She watched him recalibrate. Dr. Calloway, he said. I need to explain. You don't. She moved toward the door. You're not my patient in any capacity beyond the medical. Whatever you think you need to explain has nothing to do with your treatment here. I knew, he said. She stopped walking. About the pregnancy. I knew and I left anyway, and I have been aware of what that makes me every day for the last 8 years. His voice was flat, like he was reciting something he'd rehearsed into the floor of whatever room he slept in. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I needed you to know I didn't forget. She stood at the door with her hand on the frame and breathed carefully, the way she'd learned to breathe in the moments when her body wanted to do something her mind hadn't cleared yet. There's a child, she said, not a question. He was very still. 8 years old, she said. Almost. She watched his face do something she hadn't expected. Not the composure cracking. She'd braced for composure, for the carefully managed reaction of a man who controlled everything. But something simpler than that. Something she didn't have a word for in the clinical vocabulary she'd built for herself. He looked like he'd been waiting for that sentence for a long time and had stopped believing he'd ever hear it. A girl, Wren said. Her name is Sayurse. She didn't tell him anything else that day. He was a patient. He needed rest and monitoring. She handed his chart to Dr. Maddox, citing exactly the personal conflict she'd considered citing an hour earlier, and she finished her shift and drove to Source's school and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes before going in. Source came out with a drawing of a bioluminescent jellyfish and a permission slip for a field trip and a detailed complaint about the lunch options that day, and Wren listened to all of it and held it all carefully and said the right things And when they got home, she made grilled cheese and watched her daughter eat it and thought, "This is what I built. This is mine." She didn't know yet how much of it was about to be tested. The call came at 11 that night, a number she didn't recognize, but she answered anyway because she was a doctor, and doctors answered unknown numbers at 11 at night. Dr. Calloway. Calm, unhurried, like he called strangers in the middle of the night regularly and found it unremarkable. "I apologize for the hour. There's a situation. Mr. Voss is my colleague's patient now." "I understand. This isn't about his medical care." A pause. "There are people who know he came to St. Augustine, people who'd prefer he not leave. I want to be transparent with you because you're involved now whether you want to be." The cold that moved through her was familiar. She'd felt it in triage when things turned fast, when the situation rearranged itself into something more serious than it had looked 30 seconds ago. "Involved how?" she said. "They know who you are. They've made it a habit to know things about the people in his vicinity." Another pause, "Including the fact that you have a daughter." Wren was very still. "What do you need from me?" she said. She called in, told them a family emergency. She packed a bag for Source with the calm, methodical efficiency of someone who had learned that panic was not useful and was therefore not an option. She called her mother, told her to go stay with her sister in Phoenix without explaining why. Just, "Please, Mom, just go. I'll explain later." And her mother, who knew Wren well enough to know when not to ask, went. Circe woke up when Wren came in to get her. "Mama?" Sleepy, confused, her hair in the disaster it always was after 12 hours on a pillow. "We're going on an adventure," Wren said. It was the thing she always said when Source was small and something was hard, and it had lost none of its power. Now? Now. Source considered this with the gravity she applied to most things. "Can I bring my jellyfish book?" "Bring whatever fits in your backpack." Garrett met them 2 blocks from the hospital at an address he'd texted with no additional context. There was a car, dark, nondescript, the kind of vehicle that was specifically designed to be forgettable, and Callum was in the back seat, still pale from blood loss, his ribs wrapped, wearing someone else's clothes. Source looked at him with the frank, unfiltered attention of a 7-year-old. "You look terrible," she said. "Source," Wren said. "He does, though." Callum looked at Source for a long moment. His face had gone very still again, but differently than before. Not the composure of a man managing a situation, but something closer to awe, which was not a quality Wren had ever associated with him, and which she found, against her better judgment, more unsettling than anything else that had happened today. "You're right," he said. "I do." Source nodded, apparently satisfied, and climbed into the car. They drove for 2 hours. Garrett was in the front. A woman named Nadia drove, quiet, efficient, the same careful stillness as Garrett. Source fell asleep against Wren's shoulder somewhere around the 40-minute mark, and the car was quiet after that, and Wren became aware that Callum was watching her daughter sleep. "Don't," she said, soft, so it didn't wake Source. "I'm not doing anything. I know what you're doing. You're looking at her and building something in your head that you don't have the right to build yet." She kept her voice level. "You left. You left us. You left her. She just didn't know it, and you don't get to sit in a car looking at her like she's yours. She is mine." "No." She held his gaze. "She's mine. She's been mine for 8 years. You don't get to claim something you abandoned." He didn't argue. That surprised her. She'd expected him to push back, to make a case, to do the thing powerful men did when they wanted something, which was to behave as though wanting it badly enough was sufficient justification. Instead, he looked away, back out the window at the dark highway, and said nothing. She didn't know what to do with that. She'd prepared herself for a fight. The safe house was a rental property in a small town 2 hours outside the city. Clean, ordinary, the kind of place that passed without notice. 3 bedrooms. A kitchen that smelled like someone had recently made coffee. Source woke up long enough to brush her teeth and ask if there was Wi-Fi, and then fell back asleep in a bed that was not her bed, with the adaptability of a child who had been raised by a mother who taught her early that home was not a place, it was a person. Wren sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee she didn't drink and waited. Callum came in 20 minutes after the others had settled. He moved carefully, the ribs, the blood loss, the particular caution of a man who understood exactly how damaged he was. He sat across from her without being invited. "Ask me," he said. "Ask you what?" "Whatever you've been holding for 8 years." She looked at him. The overhead light was harsh and unforgiving, and he looked old in it, older than 40 had any right to look, and she wondered what the last 8 years had cost him, and then was angry at herself for wondering. "Why did you leave?" she said. "Because I was afraid that staying would put you in danger." He said it simply, without the performance of emotion she'd expected. "I was already involved in things I couldn't extract myself from quickly, and I'd kept that from you. And when you told me about the pregnancy, I realized that if I stayed, I was going to pull you into something that had no clean edges. And I couldn't do that to you. So you did it anyway," she said. "You just did it without telling me." He was quiet. "I was alone," she said. "I was 26 and pregnant and alone, and I didn't know why. And I spent a really long time thinking I'd done something wrong, that there was something about me that made you leave." She stopped. She hadn't meant to say that. She'd meant to be clinical, controlled, to ask her questions and get her information, and treat this like a situation to be managed. I know that's not your fault in the way I'm making it sound. But you asked." "I know," he said. "And now she's 7, Wren said. "And she asked me about you once, when she was 5. She asked if you knew about her, and I said yes." Callum looked down at the table. "That answer hurt her," Wren said. "She didn't say so, but I know my daughter. She understood what it meant, that you knew and you still didn't come. She accepted it in that way she accepts hard things, quietly, completely, and she moved on. But it's there. It's in her." "I know," he said again. His voice had gone rough. "So whatever you think you're going to do now," she said, "I need you to understand that she is not a loose end. She is not collateral. She is a 7-year-old girl who likes jellyfish and is reading 3 grade levels ahead and corrects her teacher regularly enough that I've been asked to have a conversation about it." She leaned forward. "And if you are going to be in her life, if that's what you're saying, then you have to earn it. Not from me. From her." He looked up. "Okay," he said. The next 2 days were strange in the way that crises were always strange. The compression of time, the hyper-clarity of small moments, the way ordinary things like coffee and sunlight felt both more and less real than usual. Source, who Wren had expected to find strange and unsettling, treated the situation with the philosophical flexibility she brought to most things. She liked Garrett immediately and peppered him with questions about his job that he answered in careful, edited ways that were both honest and vague. She was suspicious of Nadia until Nadia mentioned she'd once gone diving in the Mariana Trench region, at which point Circe declared her acceptable. She circled Callum, not hostilely. It was more like observation. She watched him from across rooms. She asked him, once, what he did for work, and he said he managed things, and she looked at him for a long moment and said, "What kinds of things?" And he said, "Complicated things." And she said, "That's not an answer," and went back to her book. On the second morning, she sat down next to him at the kitchen table while he was drinking coffee, which Wren witnessed from the hallway without breathing. "My mom said you knew about me," Source said. Callum put down his cup. "Yes, but you didn't come." "No." Source considered this. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Wren watched him decide something. "I was afraid," he said. "That's the honest answer. I was afraid that if I stayed, I would make things harder and more dangerous for you and your mom, and I made a bad choice. I thought leaving was protection, and it wasn't." Source looked at him with those dark eyes, his eyes, though she looked like Wren in almost every other way, and she said, "That was really dumb." "Yes," Callum said, "it was." Another long look. "Are you going to leave again?" "No. How do I know that?" "You don't yet. I'd have to show you." Source sat with this. Then she picked up her book and opened it to where she'd left off and said, without looking up, "Okay, you can start by learning what a siphonophore is." Wren leaned her head against the hallway wall and didn't let herself cry, but it was a near thing. The situation with Callum's enemies resolved in ways that Wren was deliberately not given full information about and didn't push for, because she was smart enough to know that some information was not useful to her and would only create problems she wasn't equipped to manage. What she understood was this: There were people who'd wanted leverage over Callum, who had identified her and Saoirse as potential leverage, and Garrett had neutralized that threat. Legally, he insisted, though the word legally had a particular flatness in his voice that made it clear it occupied a wide spectrum. On the third day, Garrett told them it was safe to go home. Wren packed Saoirse's bag. She moved through it efficiently, the same way she'd moved through the packing 3 days ago, because efficiency was her default state, and she'd never had the luxury of letting it be otherwise. Callum appeared in the doorway of the bedroom. "I want to be in her life," he said. "I want to try to be in yours, eventually, if you'd let me, but I understand if that's not something you're willing to consider." "Seer comes first. She always comes first," Wren said. "You'd better understand that now." "I do." She looked at him. The harsh light, the careful way he was holding himself because of the ribs, the eyes that she saw in her daughter's face every morning. 8 years was a long time. She was not the 26-year-old who'd stood in an empty apartment with a sticky note and cried on her bathroom floor. She was something different now, made of different material, held together differently. She didn't love him. She wasn't sure she even trusted him. But she knew what it felt like to make a decision based on fear and have it cost you everything. She knew what it looked like when someone understood, finally, what they'd chosen. "Supervised," she said. "Structured. You call when you say you're going to call. You show up when you say you're going to show up. And if you disappear again, I won't. If you do," she said, "I will not give you a third chance. And more importantly, she won't." He nodded. "Start with the siphonophore," she said. For the first time since she'd seen him through the glass doors of St. Augustine, something moved across his face that looked almost like a real smile. They drove home on a Tuesday morning, Saoirse explaining the colonial organism structure of siphonophores to Callum in the back seat while Wren drove and watched them in the rearview mirror. The light was good. The highway was flat and clear. Saoirse's voice had the particular cadence it got when she was talking about something she loved. Faster, more precise, her hands drawing shapes in the air. Callum listened. He asked the right questions. And Wren, watching, thought, maybe, not a certainty. Not forgiveness, not yet, not all the way. But the place where a maybe lived, careful, conditional, built on demonstrated behavior rather than promises. She thought about the sticky note in her nightstand. She thought about the shape of the last 8 years, full and hard in hers. She didn't know what the next 8 would look like. But for the first time in a long time, she thought it might look like something she hadn't planned for. That was terrifying. And it was also, underneath the terror, quieter, real, something that felt a lot like the first green edge of hope.